Hey friends, it's Thursday afternoon, which you already knew because you clicked on time for Q&A with Lee. And if you're wondering why I'm sitting outside my house, there's a rule in my house that I'm not allowed to talk about my active buyers and sellers in the house because we've talked about it too much over time. So you should totally give me a high five in the comments if real estate is also a banned topic in your house. And for those of y'all that said, Lee, where are the chickens? You just heard the rooster. All right, so the first question you submitted for this week: do you only sell homes in markets you're intimately familiar with and live close to? Or if you're out of state, far away, etc., how do you get that on-the-ground intel to advise your clients on the things they need to know? Okay, so first of all, if you're out of state, far away, etc., you should not be representing anybody as their realtor. Period. End of discussion. It's actually a violation of the Realtor Code of Ethics because you are supposed to have knowledge about the product you're selling, and it could be also a violation of your state license law where we are granted as licensees with a public trust. So I will tell you, I think you should know very, very well what you're doing in real estate, and by very, very well, here's what intimately familiar with looks like. It's not just the houses and the neighborhoods. It's also the builders, the building styles, the construction familiarity. It is what's happening with the DOT. That's something a lot of realtors forget to look at, and a lot of home buyers and sellers have been completely caught off guard by, is that the state that you live in has a Department of Transportation, and at any time there are funded projects and there are proposed projects. In the proposed category are funded and unfunded. Those are three different layers of time frames and funding capabilities, which means there could be a project plan for my street right here, which is not a state maintained road. We're not on the DOT website, but one day if my street ever landed on there as a proposed and funded project, I'd know it's coming soon. If it's proposed and unfunded, it's further out. But either way, if I were to sell the house, the buyers have the right to know what they could be dealing with in the future, which goes back to why you should always be intimately familiar with the areas where you sell. It means you should also know things about zoning. You should be familiar with the climate. You should be familiar with the schools. You should be familiar with jobs and opportunities and stuff. I mean, a really great realtor knows so much more than the house they're actually showing. They're going to give some tidbits and insights. And another great example of how you could be intimately familiar with your area has to do with grocery stores. And where I live, right here in Cabarrus County, there's the high-end grocery store that's Publix. You know, they came up out of Florida and snuck over the South Carolina line, and we all celebrated. But Harris Teeter didn't, because they compete with Publix for the top end grocery stores. In Charlotte, they have Whole Foods. We don't have it in Cabarrus County, although I've heard they call it Whole Paycheck. But we also have Food Line. That is our bargain grocery store. There's Aldi, which is like the big lots of grocery stores. You've got Lowe's Foods, which is the regional chain, my favorite one. So each of them has a different price point and personality. And that's one of those things that a realtor can advise their client on when you're moving in from out of state. If I'm talking to somebody from, example, Morristown, New Jersey, there are so many people who move to Charlotte from Morristown, it's crazy, and they primarily land in 28277, which is the Ballantyne area of Charlotte. When I know that kind of information really well, I can also say, well, I've been to Morristown, and here's how this matches up with where you've been, and here's how it's different. That's how realtors are wildly different and impactful in ways that websites, AI, and just apps can't ever do. Let's see, how do you get the on-the-ground intel? Be out and about, put your phone down and say hey to people. Go talk to the Chamber of Commerce, talk to the people at the Visitor and Convention Bureau, talk to your broker, talk to people at church, at synagogue, wherever you hang out, at the ball field. There's so many things you could be learning just by being curious. And one of my mentors in the business is the late, great Howard Brenton. Y'all remember Howard? He started the Star Power Network 1,000 years ago, and I'm so glad to see it trying to make a recurrence here. Howard always said this phrase, you ready? You ready? Get out of judgment and into curiosity. And too many of us stay in judgment because we think we know everything. I'm curious all the time. I want to know things about people, which, for example, I was talking to my friend Nell last night. She's from Charleston, South Carolina, and I've known Nell a long time. I didn't know that her son played polo. And I said, polo, like the kind on the horse in Pretty Woman? And she said, yes. And so it was a whole different rabbit hole. And then another friend of ours walked up and I said, did you know that Nell's son played polo? And she said, what? And that's what curiosity gives you. It gives you depth. And that's one of those things that realtors bring to the table that also builds your business long-term, is that depth. Okay, let's see. Oh, and by the way, if you're an early career realtor, this is a great way to compete with those of us that are seasoned, AKA old guard, because we might not be paying really good attention to the Business Journal jobs reports or what's happening at the DOT. If you're an early career realtor and you dig into some of these really not sexy but very important issues, you can give that information to home sellers and home buyers. And by the way, then you volunteer on the government affairs committee and you start to figure out that when the realtors do politics, that's the kind of stuff we do, not the big party R&D stuff, but the really not sexy policy issues where we change everything. Okay, next question. What kind of indicators might be good predictors of where hot markets might be popping up in the future? I love this question. Okay, there's a really good way for you to figure this out. You're not going to want to hear me tell you. You ready? It's not going to be some easy magic website where you can say, oh, here's next hot market. Because by the way, if it lands on some website somewhere, now you have to research whose website it is, who owns it, who wrote the article. There's a whole lot of rabbit holing you have to do. Your single best resource is your planning and zoning board. I mean, y'all, that's where realtors should be volunteering. If you really want to do professional service work, in your county, in your city, there is a planning and zoning commission. It might be a planning and zoning board, but that is where proposed projects come to say, hey, we'd like to do 300 houses. We'd like to build a grocery store. We'd like to build a Topgolf. Whatever somebody wants to build, they go to planning and zoning and find out, is it going to be allowed? Is there going to be any special requirement from the town? Will they have to widen the road? See, DOT gets pulled in there. They're going to ask about water and sewer capacity, the infrastructure to support the project that they have. And friends, just know this, by the time something is thought about, the plan's put together, it's brought to planning and zoning says this looks cool, then it goes to town council, and then town council says yes, or city council says yes. Then the news hears about it, and you are so far behind the whole project. And that's where you could be a real great voice of reason in the place where you live, is by volunteering in that space. And I'm just going to point something out. You don't volunteer there because it's good for your business. It might be good for your business long term, but I want you to volunteer there because you love where you live and you want to bring a realtor's perspective. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. Our county fair just wrapped up, and it's one of my favorite things that happens in Cabarrus County. Well, I was hanging out near the political booths because I like to talk to candidates before I vote for them. I'm going to have a conversation with them. And I was talking to a gentleman on town council where I live, and we were having a conversation about future projects, proposed projects, and all these other little ins and outs of the area. And the conversation led to, hey, I got a question for you, Lee Brown. I said, what question you got? And he said, I know you're not going to like the answer. And I said, all right, what do you know about what I'm going to say that I don't know you're not going to like? What? He had already made up his mind to start with. He said, I don't like apartments right here. I said, why do you think I don't like apartments? He said, none of y'all realtors like apartments. And I said, yes, we do like them sometimes, and we don't like them sometimes, because the answer to all those things, a great realtor in the room is going to say it depends. Sometimes you do need more multifamily, and sometimes you do not need more multifamily. And sometimes what you need instead of apartments is duplexes or single family living or little pinwheel houses. It could be trailer parks. It could be a big piece of acreage that is preserved for green space. Realtors are the ones who generally bring to the conversation that we need a lot of types of housing that hit a lot of different price points. And that's one of those diversity topics realtors got to talk about more, is that we need diversity of price points and diversity of styles in areas, because that's what allows people to find something that they want, which is the American dream. So he came around to my way of thinking, and we had a wonderful discussion. Then he sent me some proposed maps that are going on, and we have a very vibrant conversation. And I'm extra grateful to him and kind of sad that he's not running for re-election, because I wish we had more elected officials that came in with an opinion and then listened, and then we listened to each other, and it layered, and finally we both had a great idea of what could make our community better. Okay, the third one. All right, this is from my buddy Brad. So this one's, he knew he was laying me up one here to soapbox about. All right, y'all ready? Lee, do you ever think, and actually, I'm surprised he didn't call me Lee Brown. Everybody calls me Lee Brown. Lee, do you ever think we will see a market where the buyer pays for their own representation? Should we? And then he said his answer, And so I won't tell you his answer till I tell you mine, because he's a wildly experienced broker and one of the thought leaders in the business. And I'm very grateful to you, Brad, for always being able to ask tough questions and not be ugly about it. So I do think we're headed into a market where buyers pay for their own representation. All right. So in the past, the way real estate's been set up is that when I list a house for a seller, we have a discussion about what the commission is going to be. And then there's a discussion about how that's going to work. Now, as a member of my MLS, I belong to the Canopy MLS. That multiple listing service is not just where we stick a house and let it go out into the interwebs. It is an agreement of all the members to cooperate. So when I put that listing in the system, I want every single member to see it, regardless of their business type or style, what they charge, what they look like, where they live. None of that matters. If they're a member, they can see it. It is a beautiful free market. So I'm going to put that house in there. Part of that cooperation with the way the MLS is set up is that my seller can choose to offer compensation to members of the MLS. That's a discussion we have at the listing appointment. So you have to understand that where that works is I'm charging X to the seller, and the seller and I discuss what portion of X could be offered to a buyer representative. Once we discuss that, we put it in the MLS, and then any agent who shows my listing on behalf of a buyer could earn that shared compensation if they bring an offer that is successful with the seller. We like to say it's a ready, willing, and able buyer. So that means a buyer agent doesn't just get paid for bringing an offer. It has to be something that's acceptable to the seller, and we got to make it through the process. And there's a whole bunch of legalese and paragraphs in the offer to purchase because of all the scenarios that arise. So what's happening right now is that there are conversations amongst the alphabet agencies, as I like to call them, about whether or not buyer agents should even be paid, because some people don't find realtors to have value. I know, right? That's crazy. But it's because they maybe haven't had good conversation with one, or haven't had the best one, or just haven't ever used one, or used one 45 years ago. There's lots of reasons people just don't understand. And frankly, a lot of that is realtors who forget to explain things like how the MLS works and what you're actually doing when you represent a buyer. So that being said, the alphabet agencies would like to see buyer agency go away, and that means they would like to see buyers just figured out on their own, because they say, well, a buyer can find it on the internet. Well, they might be able to find it, but I want you to understand something. The reason a buyer can find a house on the internet is because the agent who listed it put it into an MLS, which then syndicated it out to websites. And so the ultimate source is generally the realtor, unless you have the situation where there's a for sale by owner or somebody got access in a very different way. But usually it comes from the original listing realtor who puts it in the system and sends it out. And so when a buyer finds it somewhere, they might want to see it. Well, in their way our system is set up, they call an agent, and ideally that agent has a consultation, explains how the process works, who works for whom, how compensation works, and then the agent takes that buyer into the house and shows it to them. So we've been set up forever where there's the split. Now, if you want to know why it works that way, well, first of all, many buyers just don't have a lot of extra cash laying around. Again, I know this is wildly shocking information, but for many of the buyers that I have worked with personally, they're scratching to get their down payment saved up, whether they are FHA buyers who need 3.5% down, or they could even be VA buyers with 100% financing where they don't have to have a down payment, but they're still getting their loan closing costs together. There's money that has to be collected, and not everybody has a big pile of liquid savings, and not everybody has mom and dad who could stroke a check to help them out. Now, for example, when I bought my first house, I was waiting tables at night while I was a realtor. So yes, I worked 2 jobs because I wanted my waiting tables money to pay for my down payment. I didn't want to ask mom and dad for it, and they probably didn't have it at the time anyway. But I think about that, and it would have meant I had to work for probably another year or so to save up the commission dollars if I'd had to pay for an agent. However, I don't know that I got in a house without a realtor, because I didn't know the process. I was a brand new realtor myself, so I was learning every day. I did have the advantage of having my dad and his knowledge, but what if I hadn't? I mean, there's a lot of buyers that I've worked with that are trying desperately to figure out how to do the application. Do they need an inspection? How do surveys work? When do I get to move in? How do I get keys? What about this? What about that? And so if they don't have a realtor, it just might not ever happen. So I think about this, and it worries me about losing buyer representation more than I worry about losing compensation. And so the compensation came in because it was a more elegant way to get everybody paid for their professionalism, for their expertise, and for their time. So in a future where the alphabet agencies might say you can't have a seller paying a buyer's agent through the MLS, let's just say that there are rules about compensation, buyers would have to be able to figure out how to make that happen. So I'll go really wonky with you here, and so my nerd herd stay with me, and the rest of y'all stay with me and nerd out. Almost 80% of the loans in the United States are underwritten by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Those are your government-sanctioned entities, and they basically backstop it with a government guarantee that says to the bank, go ahead and give this borrower a loan. You've checked them out. We'll back it up. Well, one of the rules with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans is that buyers can put their loan closing costs into their mortgage, but they cannot put commissions in there. So a buyer who is saving up for their 3.5% down on FHA and who wants a realtor and needs one to get through the process, but had to pay them separately, might not have the capability to pay them. So they would say, well, can I just put it in my mortgage like my closing cost? Well, Fannie and Freddie currently say no. We need to get that fixed. And so I will tell you, that's one of the policy things that realtors and our political advocacy work, we're working towards getting some understanding of that guideline, because that should be a fairly elegant fix that would allow buyers to choose. And if buyers could figure out how to compensate and not have to come off the hip for it, that would allow for any changes in the business to not hurt people. And changes aren't necessarily bad. It's just how we handle it, and we have to make sure that the regulatory bodies don't get in the way of people for the sake of looking good on the mainstream news at night. Okay. Let's see. And by the way, should we? I do think that buyers should pay for their own representation, because I do think it would take some confusion out of the marketplace. But until then, the most important thing a realtor does is that first consultation, y'all. And I've done a couple of videos about some questions to ask if you happen to be a consumer person watching this. And you should always be told right up front how your realtor is going to be paid, when they're going to be paid. And frankly, when I'm showing a house, I print off the MLS sheet and I circle at the bottom what my compensation might be on that property, so that they will know right up front. And heaven knows, realtors earn it over and over and over. And I just want to point one more thing out to realtors who forget sometimes. It looks easy on occasion, but we also know there's a ton of work that goes in up front to make things look easy, and a lot of work that happens along the way to make things look easy. And sometimes part of your compensation is for your professionalism, your expertise, and your seasoned ability in the business, as much or more as what didn't happen in this transaction. Because sometimes it looks easy because your years of experience allowed you to know what to do, when to do, and to keep things moving forward in a way that benefits both sides of a house transaction. So Brad, I hope that answers your question. Brad said his answer is no. He does not think we'll see that market, but yes, we should. So I guess, Brad, we should probably set up a pool and see who's right over time. And that's my 3 questions for this week. So if you have something you'd like an answer to, whether it's intricate and nerdy, like, Brad and I just nerded out, or it's a little more simple about visiting, planning, and zoning, or maybe you just need to know a good tip for showing a house, I'll give you a really good tip since we're winding up Realtor Safety Month right now. Before you're a realtor, all right? So before you go to show a house to someone, do get a copy of their license. And if they won't show you their license or their ID, don't show them the house. Walmart wants to see it to take any kind of payment these days. You have your safety at risk when you walk into a house that's not yours with somebody you don't know. So ask for a copy of their ID. And if you're not sure about it, take somebody with you. Your mortgage lender would probably go with you, or another realtor. And then the most important thing I can tell you for Safety Month, if the hair on the back of your neck stands up, that's your intuition. Listen to it. A whole lot of realtors have been saved by listening to that little voice that made the hair on the back of their neck stand up. And you have to take care of yourselves out there. So anyway, make sure you log back in next Thursday at 5:30 Eastern time. And if you have a question you want me to answer, shoot it to me in DMs or by email or right here in the comments. And go enjoy this nice fall weather. I'll see you next time.